There's this idea floating around in today's world that empaths are here to heal others. It sounds noble, doesn't it? Comforting even, but like most half-truths, it conceals something much deeper. The empath wasn't born to be the endless fixer, constantly pouring themselves out into the wounds of the world. That's not their true role. Their sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's a calling. Their pain isn't damage, it's a map. The real reason they're here isn't to fix, but to reveal, to reflect something most people are afraid to face. You see, the empath is actually a mirror for humanity's collective shadow, the emotional and spiritual baggage we've buried across generations. This shadow isn't just a personal thing, it's global, it's ancient, it's made of everything we've silenced and shoved into darkness. All the unspoken rage, the denied desires, the hidden shames that get passed on like an unwanted inheritance from one generation to the next. It collects, it accumulates, and someone has to feel it. That someone is often the empath. They are like a tuning fork for the collective unconscious, vibrating with all the emotions others try to avoid. They cry for what others have gone numb to. They shake in the face of forces the rest of us pretend don't exist. Not because they're weak, but because they're built to carry a truth most people can't even name. Their strength isn't in healing, it's in awakening, in being the one who feels what everyone else refuses to feel. Empaths aren't just sensitive people. They embody an archetype, something ancient and universal that humanity has misunderstood for ages. They're what you might call the wounded mirror. They reflect what's broken, not because they're broken themselves, but because their design places them in the heart of society's emotional machinery. And what they're picking up isn't just their own stuff, it's ancestral, generational. The echoes of trauma and sorrow passed down through time, encoded into their very being. The empath often wonders, why am I like this? But maybe a better question is, whose pain am I carrying? Because the unconscious, the part of the psyche that operates beneath our awareness, doesn't care about personal boundaries. The ego wants to believe we're separate, self-contained individuals. But the unconscious doesn't work that way. It speaks in dreams and symbols and tremors, and it communicates collectively. The empath becomes its translator. I've seen this over and over again, both in clinical work and spiritual exploration. So many empaths mistake their sensitivity for personal brokenness. They think something's wrong with them, but really, they're simply tuned in to a frequency that others are too defended to perceive. It's not a failure. It's the beginning of an initiation. Because before the empath can understand their true role, they must descend into confusion and shadow. And make no mistake, the shadow is real. It's not just a poetic metaphor, it's an actual region of the psyche, full of what are called autonomous complexes. These are like little, independent entities that form from trauma and repression. They live inside us, influencing our behavior and perception. And when they don't get expressed or acknowledged, they seek expression through projection, often onto the empath, who has the porous boundaries to absorb them. This is why empaths feel not just one person's pain, but the suffering of families, communities, even whole cultures. But this is also their power. If they can stay with that discomfort, if they can endure long enough to understand what they're carrying, they can transmute it. They become alchemists, transformers of shadow into awareness. That's not healing in the way we usually think of it. It's not fixing. It's revealing. It's about bringing what was hidden into the light, even if it shakes the foundations of ego and comfort. Because within the collective shadow lies not only the horrors of humanity, racism, war, betrayal, abuse, but also our brilliance, our wild joy, our sacred instincts that have been buried for too long. When an empath wakes up to their true nature, they don't just grieve the suffering. They also grieve the beauty that was forgotten. The holy things, the ecstatic, they become a psychic reflector, not by choice but by design. And that design isn't a curse, it's a soul contract, something they agreed to before birth, often misunderstood until later in life when the persona starts to crack and the real self emerges from underneath. If you're someone who has always felt too much, been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, this is for you. You weren't born to patch up what's broken in everyone else. You're here to expose the myth that healing is about fixing. True healing starts with truth, with witnessing, with presence. Empathy without boundaries is martyrdom. But empathy fused with shadow work, that's revolution. And to engage in that revolution, you have to be willing to step into the darkness. Not as a victim, as a guide, you must learn the difference between compassion and fusion. The unawakened empath fuses. They take on everyone's emotions, thinking it's their job to absorb. But the awakened empath stands at the edge and says, I see you. I don't abandon you, but I am not you. That's the moment sovereignty is born. It's when the empath stops being a sponge and becomes an oracle. And the oracle, the oracle. This ancient figure doesn't just predict the future. They speak the truths that are hidden. They dwell in the in-between spaces, between worlds, between illusions, and because of that, they're often punished, ridiculed, rejected. But that, too, is part of the journey. The world doesn't thank those who disturb its sleep, but the soul does. When you cry tears that belong to a lineage, when you feel the grief of generations and refuse to numb it, you're not being dramatic. You're doing sacred work. The ego may call you too much. Society may label you too weak. But the psyche knows you are the key. The key to what? Integration. The reunification of what's been split, because the empath carries the gold that's hidden inside the rejected parts. They are the bridge between what we know and what we've forgotten, between the rational and the instinctual, between the conscious and the unconscious. And that's why so many empaths feel like they don't fully belong. They live between realms, on the threshold. They hear what isn't said. They feel what isn't shown. They remember things they never lived. This isn't pathology. This is mysticism. This is what it means to embody an archetype. And the empath wasn't built for comfort. Their nervous system is designed to be permeable, not as a flaw, but as a vessel. One porous enough to let the collective energy in, and strong enough not to collapse under its weight. Most empaths don't collapse because they're weak. They collapse because they've been trying to carry something they were never meant to carry alone. They've been mistaking the weight of the world for their own pain. But what they're feeling is the ache of humanity moving through them, seeking form, seeking witness, seeking voice. So I ask you, do you remember your dreams? That's not a clinical question. It's not about diagnosis. It's a mystical one. Because empaths often dream in ways that go far beyond the personal. Their dreams aren't just subconscious processing, they're mythic, symbolic, full of images and messages that don't belong solely to them. They dream of burning cities, of crying mothers, of children behind invisible doors. These are not random nightmares, they are transmissions from the collective unconscious. The empath's psyche becomes a vessel for the grief of generations. It's not uncommon for an empath to carry in sleep what a nation cannot process in waking life. That's the burden of the oracle. And when this capacity is ignored, when it's unacknowledged or pathologized, the empath ends up overwhelmed. Not because they're fragile, but because they're trying to interpret mythic material through a personal lens. And that just doesn't work. What's needed instead is symbolic awareness. See, the unconscious doesn't speak in straight lines. It speaks in symbols, in paradoxes, in synchronicities and metaphors. But the unawakened empath often misreads those symbols as chaos, as madness, when in fact they're sacred messages asking to be translated. Madness is just mystery that hasn't been decoded. Once an empath begins to understand their visions, emotions, and sensations as archetypal data, not just personal experience, they shift. They stop feeling like victims of life and become students of the soul. Let me give you a real-life example. A woman once came to me carrying a deep, unexplainable sorrow. She hadn't experienced major trauma. Her life, by most accounts, was stable. But every morning she woke up with a weight on her chest, as if the air itself was grieving. She avoided conflict, cried easily, and couldn't explain the heavy guilt she felt every day. In her dreams, she was always fleeing from ruined cities, clutching children she didn't know. When we began working with her dreams, not as metaphors but as living stories, we uncovered something powerful. The children weren't symbolic of her own future or fertility. They were the ungrieved dead from her family line. Her ancestors had survived war, famine, genocide. She was the first to be born into peace, and peace had made the pain visible. She wasn't broken. She was chosen. Her soul had been entrusted with a burden never mourned. She was carrying ancestral sorrow, and her gift was to give it voice, to cry the tears that had been held back for generations. This is the work of the empath, not to fix what is broken, but to feel what has never been allowed. But again, this isn't about martyrdom, it's about transformation. The empath must learn to work with shadow symbolically, not personally, to witness suffering, not merge with it. Because when they stay fused with pain, they can't help anyone, not even themselves. But when they step back just enough to witness it, they become something else entirely, a sacred witness, an alchemist. Healing, for the empath, doesn't happen through absorption. It happens through integration. And what is integration, really? It's not perfection. It's not happiness. It's the capacity to hold opposites, to honor light and dark, joy and sorrow, anger and tenderness, without collapsing into either side. This is the empath's potential, to be the bridge between worlds, to embody the third thing born from tension between opposites. Not either or, both and. But this kind of integration doesn't come from being around people all the time. It requires solitude. The empath must retreat into silence, into nature, into their own depths, not to escape, but to hear the whisper of the soul. In every myth, the hero or the initiate always disappears for a while, into a forest, a cave, a desert. These aren't punishments, they're places of revelation. The empath must befriend the hermit inside themselves, because when they return from that solitude, they bring back gold, vision, truth, and their presence alone becomes transformative, not because they try to change people, but because they are changed. This is why, in many ancient traditions, the ones we'd now call empaths were revered. They were the shamans, the oracles, the visionaries, not seen as sick, but as seers, as intermediaries between the visible and invisible realms. But today, we medicate what ancient cultures initiated. We numb what was once considered sacred. The suffering of Awaken. The empath isn't proof of their disorder. It's proof of a culture that has forgotten how to honor the sacred. And the sacred always comes through the body. The empath's body is not the enemy. It's the text. It's the oracle. But so many empaths live in conflict with their bodies. They see their trembling, their fatigue, their tears as signs of weakness, as betrayal. But they're not. They're messages. Messages from the unconscious, written not in words, but in sensation. When your chest tightens around someone, listen. When your skin crawls, pay attention. When your whole body recoils or vibrates, don't dismiss it. That's information. It's truth trying to speak through you. The awakened empath becomes a prophet, not of belief systems or doctrines, but of embodiment. They don't just talk about shadow. They feel it. They don't theorize about trauma. They carry it. And in doing so, they become its translator. They give it shape. Words, movement, tears, language. They offer what has been silenced a way to speak. That's why their gift is so threatening. Because the truth they carry isn't polite. It's not easy. It doesn't let people stay asleep. It exposes the fractures in our myths about goodness and control. And when someone refuses to look away from what's hard, what's real, they shake the foundation of every collective illusion. And for that, empaths are often scapegoated, not just by society but by families, by systems. They're labeled too much, too intense, too dramatic. But remember this, in ancient cultures, the scapegoat wasn't cast out because they were flawed. They were cast out because they were carrying the shadow of the group. The scapegoat bore what others could not. But that isn't the empath's destiny. It's just part of their myth. And myths are not fate, they're invitations. The empath's final initiation, the one that turns their gift into sovereignty, is release. To feel what was denied, to name what was hidden, and then to let it go, to say, this was never mine. But I was strong enough to carry it. And now I return it to the world, transformed. That moment, that release, that is liberation, that is sovereignty, that is the turning point where the empath remembers why they're really here. Not to fix, not to bleed, not to absorb, but to awaken. So what exactly are empaths here to awaken? They're here to reveal that the collective shadow, the parts of humanity we've exiled, denied, buried, isn't evil. It's unlived life, it's potential that hasn't yet been integrated. Within that shadow lies not just our darkness, but our future. And the empath's role is to guide us there, not through force, not through preaching, but by embodying what it means to feel deeply and live honestly. They don't teach with words, they teach by being, by standing in the fullness of their sensitivity without shame, by refusing to numb, by choosing to feel, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes others uncomfortable, especially then. This is the alchemical act, to take in the raw material of the unconscious, the lead, and return the gold of awareness. The empath, when awakened, becomes the alchemist of shadow, no longer drowning in the tides of emotion, but swimming in the deeper waters of mystery. This isn't about being fixed, it's about being initiated. And to be initiated is not to be granted comfort. It's to cross a threshold where there's no going back. The empath who has stepped into their truth no longer fits into the old roles. They're not here to perform, to placate, or to play along with unconscious systems. They are emissaries of something far deeper, something evolutionary. But this awakening doesn't happen all at once. It comes in waves, sometimes gently, sometimes like a storm. The first wave is disillusionment. The empath begins to realize that their urge to help others often came from a desire to avoid their own chaos, that their compassion, unchecked, was a defense mechanism. They see that empathy without boundaries is just self-erasure. Then comes the collapse. The moment where they can no longer carry it all, where they're forced to stop trying to save everyone else and start learning how to hold themselves. And if they make it through that, if they endure, then comes the remembering, I was never here to fix. I was here to feel. Feeling, deep, sacred, unfiltered feeling, is not weakness. It's perception. It's the right hand of intuition. When refined through shadow work, it becomes a compass that points toward what is true, even when that truth is unwelcome. But truth, if spoken without grace, becomes a weapon. That's why the mature empath must learn to temper their insight with compassion. The unawakened empath seeks validation. The awakening empath seeks release. But the mature empath, they seek connection, not fusion. Connection between sovereign souls. And that requires humility. It means knowing that not all pain is theirs to carry, not all suffering is theirs to reflect. The empath must learn to discern what's mine, what's ancestral, what's cultural, what's collective. Without that clarity, they risk getting pulled back into patterns that no longer serve. There's a danger here, romanticizing the struggle. Many empaths mistake emotional chaos for spiritual depth, but chaos without insight is not mysticism, it's confusion. The goal is not to dissolve in feeling, it's to refine it, to become not a sponge, but a chalice. Yes, the chalice, that ancient symbol of sacred containment. In the legends of the Holy Grail, it's not a symbol of suffering, it's a symbol of sanctity, of transformation. The empath must learn to hold pain without becoming it, to honor it without identifying with it. And that is no small task. To do it, the empath must face their own shadow, not just the collective's. They must look at the parts of themselves that secretly enjoy being needed, that derive worth from rescuing others, that fear their own emptiness and use service as a distraction. Only when they've done that inner work can they love freely. Only then can they say, I see your pain. I honor it. But I don't need to fix it to feel whole. That's real compassion. Not codependency wearing a mask, but presence, without agenda. And when the empath starts to live from that place, something extraordinary happens. They begin to emit a kind of field, not a wall, not a shield, a field of coherence. Others can feel it. They may not understand it, but they soften in its presence, not because they're being saved, but because they're being seen. To see without judgment is the rarest form of love, and the awakened empath becomes a vessel for that kind of love, but only after they've seen themselves completely, the rage, the fear, the tenderness, the brilliance, the hunger, the divinity. When they've embraced their own totality, they can finally see the world with clear eyes. And that kind of seeing, it's catalytic. They become a mirror, a magnet, a map, a mirror because they reflect what others cannot yet name, a magnet because they draw forward what has been hidden, a map because they show us the path from unconscious fusion to conscious presence. So no, the empath wasn't born to heal the world. Healing is just the side effect of their real work. Their real work is awakening. They're here to awaken the collective shadow, not to destroy it, not to shame it, but to reveal its gold. Because within the shadow lies our forgotten genius, our repressed vitality, our future. The empath is the custodian of that future, not a fantasy future of machines and progress, but a psychic future. One where we remember that the soul is real, that the unconscious isn't something to fix, but something to respect. That mystery isn't a problem, it's a presence. And empaths? You've always known this. Even when you were embarrassed by your tears, even when your dreams didn't make sense, even when people told you you were too much. You knew. The knowing was buried, but it never died. It was waiting, like a seed beneath the snow, for the moment you'd remember. And that moment is now, because we're living in a time when the unconscious is breaking through the floorboards of modern life, in politics, in families, in the body. What used to be hidden is erupting into view, and while many are terrified, the empath knows this isn't the end. It's the labor, the contractions before birth. Yes, it hurts. Transformation always does. But what's being born is something sacred. We are shifting from a culture of repression to a culture of reflection, and empaths are both guide and ground in this shift. They don't lead by controlling. They lead by embodying, by refusing to numb, by choosing to feel. Feeling in an unfeeling world is an act of revolution. But more than that, it's an act of creation of new myths, new ways of belonging, new ways of being human. The empath who accepts their calling becomes a myth maker. They stop living by the myths handed down from a wounded world. They start writing their own. Through their choices, through their art, through their breath, they speak in the language of metaphor and emotion and vision. Because they're not here to fit in, they're here to stretch the edges of what's possible, to whisper of an older wisdom, a deeper order, one that lives in the bones and the belly and the heart. This wisdom doesn't need credentials. It doesn't seek permission. It simply waits for the empath to stop apologizing, to stop shrinking, to stop trying to be palatable. Yes, your presence will disturb. That's part of your design. You will make people uncomfortable. That's part of your gift. Because you're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be awake and to awaken others. And awakening? It always begins with one brave soul saying, I will not carry what isn't mine. I will not bleed to earn my place. I will not fuse with pain to prove I care. I will feel with clarity, witness with strength, and speak with love that pierces illusion. That is the empath's revolution. Not loud, not flashy, but seismic, not obvious, but unforgettable. And so, I leave you with this. Are you ready to stop healing what doesn't want to be healed? And start awakening what's finally ready to remember? Are you ready to set down the martyr's robe and rise as the oracle you were always meant to be? Then breathe, feel, witness, and begin.